We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from supportive to disruptive, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. Many are willing to exchange their liberty for a form of socialism. Through this podcast, we will chart a course to get America back on track.
Hi, I am Barry Farah, daughter of Barry Farah. My dad's a best-selling author, CEO across 6 industries, and former candidate for governor of Colorado. He is also a private pilot, adventurer, and engaging life coach. I should know. Through Culture Shift, my dad will systematically deliver a fresh and compelling path that will help you create your own American dream.
Hey, welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. We really are interested in your freedom and your success, and they kind of depend on each other. For you to be truly successful, I believe you need to be free. Today, we're going to look at what happened yesterday, January 6th, 2021. It might be more than yesterday for you, but it's yesterday for me. And we're going to look at that in light of the last 2 freedom rights that are mentioned in the First Amendment. You can say the last 2. Yeah, there's a bunch. There's like 6. So today we're going to tackle the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Peaceably assemble. Next time, we'll look at the final right in the First Amendment, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the First Amendment lists 6 freedom rights if you don't combine any of them. The freedom of religion, to exercise religious belief, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, the right of the people to peaceably assemble, which we're going to do today, and the right of the people to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, honestly, it's kind of a required freedom right in order for the other 4 to have a chance. In other words, you can't really have freedom of religion. You certainly can't have the free exercise of religious belief or the freedom of speech or the freedom of the press without the freedom of assembly. Now, I'm going to just share for a minute a big picture connection between peace and the Bible and its explanation for how people should live. Now, some of you don't agree with my belief that the Bible is from God, but just hang with me and let me have a shot at it here. So in the Bible, there are 421 mentions of peace. They're explicit. And in the Bible, the discussion on peace is that peace comes from God. God desires for you to be personally at peace. In fact, one of the final things Jesus said on earth was that he wanted not just the peace of the world, but the real peace to be in you. And that by being in your heart, you could actually be at peace from anxiety. And he also wants, and if you look at all the biblical exhortations of all of these community events, you talk about a lot of community events. Look at the Old Testament, joyous celebrations of all kinds of events. In fact, when I was in the 7th grade, I was trying to remember, but yes, 7th grade, I was in Israel. My dad had a teaching assignment over there, and we went to this school that celebrated all the Christian holidays, and it celebrated all the Jewish holidays. And so, man, there's a lot of holidays. We hardly went to school. It was a blast. If you count the times I played hooky, then I didn't really say that. But that's because God desires for the community to be at peace in an assembly and peaceably assemble. And in the New Testament, one of the strongest exhortations about peace as it relates to other people in any kind of an assembly is that you are to be at peace with all people as far as it's possible with your own personal behavior. So as far as you can control it, the dominant teaching of the New Testament leaders was that you would be at peace with everyone as far as was possible by you. So this peaceable assembly concept has some roots that are valuable to me, and I just thought I'd share that with you, whether or not you agree with me on the Bible's authority. So let's look at peaceable assembly in the United States. It's truly enshrined in our U.S. Constitution. It's got a real history. You know, at the time of the 1789 Constitution, in every one of the framers' minds was the 1774 coercive acts. What were the coercive acts? These were the laws that England passed to punish the rebels after the Boston Tea Party. Remember the Boston Tea Party, where we were basically protesting attacks that we thought was without any representation. So these coercive acts go on forever. You really ought to look them up and read one or two. They're crazy. But basically, they're saying, the American colonists called them the intolerable acts because they're intolerable. So here's the deal. King George had a royal governor of Massachusetts, and his name was General Thomas Gage, and he was a power-hungry son of a gun. And he had been given authority to declare town meetings illegal and all kinds of other stuff. So he did. And what's worse is he enforced these shutdowns with troops. So these intolerable acts are a big deal. And basically, England was declaring that meetings among people, even peaceable ones, are illegal. Getting together is illegal. So the Americans responded. Now, this is 2 years before the Declaration. This is before we're a nation. Yet, we formed the First Continental Congress in 1774, and on October 14th in 1774, we shot back across the pond, and this is how it read. The inhabitants of the English colonies in North America, by the immutable laws of nature, have the following rights. They have a right peaceably to assemble, and on other rights go. And at the very end it says, and all prosecutions, prohibitory proclamations are illegal. In other words, the Americans shot across to the English Parliament and said, pound sand. I mean, it's just not going to happen. We are going to assemble. You can't tell us that we can't get together with people. So it's no surprise that the peaceable right to assemble is included in the first of the 10 Bill of Rights. So in 1791, the right of assembly was recognized in the United States Constitution. You get the 1789 Constitution that's ratified, and then it goes around with all those Bill of Rights. We talked about that before. And the Bill of Rights get inserted as part of the Constitution in 1791. In the centennial year from the Declaration, the Supreme Court of the United States said basically that the First Amendment is a guarantee, and it definitely guarantees people against the federal government's encroachment. But we're going to allow the states to make their own decisions. So that caused a lot of problems. Later, the Supreme Court would determine that the federal government could extend the Bill of Rights to all the state governments. So you in the state, you can determine your own whiskey tax, you can do all that stuff. You can have mostly run your rules and regs the way you want to. But when it comes to these fundamental rights, you have to abide by these. So all the states now have to allow for the right to peaceably assemble, as well as all the other rights. So this freedom of assembly has protected gatherings of groups all across the board. Business groups. I mean, if you go back to normal days, way before March of 2020, and you would go to a business conference in LA or to Las Vegas or Boston or Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, pick a big city. You could, at any day of the week, find all kinds of advocacy groups that were in conferences putting together their freedom of assembly plan to advocate for what they wanted to get or accomplish to the government. So all kinds of things you've seen and heard of, the civil rights advocates. You know, there's a pro-meat advocate. There's also an anti-meat group. There's the pro-life group. I'm a part of that. There's the anti-preborn life group. There's the pro-military supporters, the anti-war protesters, striking union workers, communists, the American Nazi Party. All of those groups have been able to gather publicly in protest or in support of their causes. In 1913, women suffragists, they filled the city streets to advance their cause. In 1963, the civil rights movement gained so much steam when there was that big, massive march on Washington. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech was inspired, and he promulgated peaceable assembly. In 1977, the National Socialist Party proposed a march in the village of Skokie, Illinois. This is a very different type of a group. This is a sacred place, Skokie, Illinois, for many survivors of the Nazi Holocaust. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that ultimately the assembly of the neo-Nazis was a First Amendment right. So all these people in Skokie, Illinois were very upset. But it's interesting, the bottom line of this determination by the Supreme Court was that even if the ideas are dishonorable, and even if the speech that comes from those bad ideas are distasteful, it's worth protecting their right to peaceably assemble so we can protect everyone else's. And the commentary on this was as follows. Look, the best ideas will win. So what we want to do is allow for more assembly, more ideas, more speech, not less, and truly the best ideas will win. Well, in this instance, at least, that worked. There was such an outrage against the neo-Nazis that it raised awareness of how bad the Holocaust was for the Jews. By this time, it was almost 30 years, and people were trying to forget it. But there were still survivors alive. And what this did is it had the effect of more broadly telling the Holocaust story. People like Corrie ten Boom became even more broadly known. This endeared more support than ever against the neo-Nazis. By the way, my mom was mentored by Corrie ten Boom, and Corrie ten Boom taught me how to forgive people. I was in the first part of this, I think the 8th grade, and there was a guy that was bugging me, and I was mad at him, and I had a bad attitude toward him. And she sat me down and taught me how to forgive him, even if I was technically right. And that was a powerful lesson. So I digress, but not really. That's the true big picture. So not long ago, we've had rallies of a completely different activism, and that was these Tea Party activists who were expressing their concerns about how big the government was getting. And it's true. I mean, the federal government is huge. And I kind of agree with that group. Unfortunately, all of their protests, they brought in some folks that agreed with them, but when push came to shove, they didn't actually shrink the government. Other groups have gathered to protest police brutality and a host of other issues. And of course, there's last year. You've got 2020, all kinds of protests, all kinds of assemblies, not all of them peaceable. The freedom of assembly has to connect peaceable to it. It's the freedom of peaceable assembly. That has shaped and continues to shape America. If Martin Luther King was not peaceable, he would not have been nearly as impactful. So let's review what actually happened in 2020, and then let's look at yesterday's debacle. In 2020, police brutality and race relations protests became violent. And this was true in dozens of cities across the country. They were called peaceful protests, but in some instances, while the news anchor was calling it a peaceful protest, there was a fire blazing literally right behind the guy that was making the statement, hey, this is a peaceful protest. And this fire was blazing because of a small bomb. Billions of dollars of property were destroyed, and many small businesses were damaged beyond recovery, not to mention the emotional damage. Lives were threatened, some lives were lost, so fear was multiplying, and people were psychologically damaged and impacted by all this. But the mainstream media had almost no outrage against those protests which turned violent. They were not peaceable assemblies. Now, concurrent with that, during the election, so in the fall, there were dozens of large rallies across the country. And these large rallies were in support of the outgoing POTUS, outgoing as of yesterday's certification. And in those large gatherings, there were almost no incidents of violence, no reported property damage, no trespassing. So that same group of people, from that same group of people, they go to yesterday's rally. So according to eyewitness accounts, the 11 a.m. Rally was 100% peaceful. And the POTUS spoke. He spoke for like 40 minutes. He reiterated his complaint. He believes the election in key battleground states was not handled in an honest manner. He explicitly exhorted people to remain peaceful, though. And that whatever your view is of the outgoing president's antics or any of his issues in that regard, you can't ignore that those are the facts from yesterday. And then even after things started to heat up, he asked people to go home and be at peace. Now, I wasn't there. I was in Arizona, but I do have friends that were in D.C. And during the rally, one of my friends, he's a middle-aged man with his family of 6. He brought them all. He reports that everything around him was completely peaceful throughout the rally. After the rally, he's walking with his family from the ellipse area to the Capitol building area. He was close enough to see a few hundred people rush the Capitol building. Now, he didn't do so, and neither did most of the crowd, but there were those that did. It appears from facial recognition and tattoo markings that about 50 to 100 were Antifa or connected to some Marxist activist group. Now, that's the speculation of eyewitnesses, but here's how it looked to them. Their view is that it looked like the Antifa-type folks were the ones that did all the damage. Those seem to be the professionals. And allegedly, the FBI has gathered up a busload of Antifa as of this video recording. Maybe I'm doing it too early, and we'll know more soon. Regardless, the eyewitnesses I talked to from yesterday said that they remained outside the barrier to the Capitol steps while it appeared that a few hundred folks took the cue from others who were rushing the Capitol building. And what it looked like to them, the way they explained it, it comports with what you've seen on some of the videos where some people rushed in, kind of looked like they knew what they were doing. It looked like some of the borders were opened up by the police in one section, and folks with hoodies on, having their back to the cameras, were going like this to encourage people to come in and join them. Either way, if you were breaching a border, that's called trespass, and that's not a good thing. That and the violence that ensued is not peaceable. Peaceable assembly is a writ, not violence and not mayhem. There's no freedom right to violently make your statement. But you shouldn't let the idiotic acts of a few people, including what appears to be some professionally hired instigators, dishearten you from free assembly. Many great things have arisen from free assembly, and it really is a requirement to guarantee the first 4 rights. It sort of ensures the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly, the freedom to exercise religious belief. Certainly, in my faith, we need to assemble to practice encouraging each other and honoring one another. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, you need a freedom of peaceable assembly. In fact, on that freedom of the press, I'm hoping the press will research each person who was arrested and publicize that. Go and do a deep dive. I just want to know what's true. I don't, but I would like to know. If it turns out that the allegations of the professionals infiltrating those who were peacefully assembling is true, that changes the narrative quite a bit. I mean, if that's true, then the real story is that the professionals were hired to keep the petition of grievances limited. And if you look at the timing, that's pretty interesting. They are breaching and coming in as the first state is being reviewed and as that first moment of debate is beginning. Well, next time we're going to look at that final freedom right in the First Amendment, the right to petition the government for grievances. In the meantime, you have a great rest of the day, and God bless you.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.